kırmızı stil. İncelikte men öz boyundan tanıta aldım.
Жалпы
Что жалко, просто на этом небе. Hear them all moving inside you. Но не любовь ценой, если третий лишний. Anyway, you are, no matter how. Shine bright like a diamond. Я буду звать тебя без шума. Цветы, цветы, self-lovers are climbing their eyes.
Pentru a preveni alinierea statelor Han și Vest, statul Qin trebuia să încheie mai întâi o alianță cu Qi. Propunerea lui Fan Jun a fost acceptată de suveranul său. Statul Qin și-a întărit relațiile de prietenie cu Qi și Chu, un alt stat din depărtare, și a anexat unul după altul statele vecine mici, unificând nord-vestul Chinei. În urma acestor тяжелыми и неудобными. Если они ломались, чаще всего приходилось вырезать новые, а это очень трудоемкий процесс.
Конечно, новая техника книгопечатания была удобнее. Она экономила время и силы. Изобретение подвижных шрифтов стало настоящим прорывом в печатном деле и внесло неоценимый вклад в развитие мировой цивилизации.
Цикл программ о китайском языке и китайской культуре
считается одним из 4 великих изобретений древних китайцев.
В основе современной типографской ишуа лежит древнее изобретение. Работы, придуманные талантливым китайским мастером, сохранился неизменным до наших дней.
Малин. Я помню, что на церемонии открытия Пекинской Олимпиады в 2008 году было необычное и очень зрелищное выступление танцоров. Они изображали в символичной форме начальное книгопечатание в Китае.
Да, авторы идеи этой грандиозной церемонии хотели отразить вклад Китая в развитие мировой культуры.
Я читал, что Дюшен провел много опытов, прежде чем сделал свои первые подвижные шрифты. Для их изготовления он использовал самый простой и распространенный материал – глину. А затем китайские последователи Дюшена научились делать шрифты из дерева, олова, меди и других материалов.
Очень важно, что печатное дело содействовало широкому распространению книг и грамотности в Китае.
سلامت باشی دست درد نکنه خلیفه جان داد باش که اول میتکر برای تصمیم کنم و تا قدمگاه به من بگیر و بعد از اون باز بقراری میکنم سری هر قسم که خودت بسافی از خیرت که راست استاد شد به خاطر جمع انداختم راستی ها رو نرم که برای بگویم از امید بچهت از طرف من تشکری کنی چرا که دیروز دختر موکله را از دان سگ که میخواست درش حمله کنه نجات داده گفتی؟ امید موکله را چنگ سگ نجات داده؟ نه هیچ باورم نمیشه که امید یک کار خوب در کسی کنه مسئله تا نفهمیدم چرا تو از امید دلسر دستی و میگی که کار خوب در کسی کنه؟ یارم آقا چی گوه؟ از دست کارهای خراب امید و چیز روزی زندگی عجیبه بسیار شد یک کلمه درسم نمیخونم روز دراز در کوچه ایلاگردی میکنم ایلاگردی چند؟ خلیفه چند راست راست میگه این اولش من پیدستم امید هر روز در کوچه همه تمام
Söğüt içine anlardı. Binanın altında bekledi nereden kendisinden mutlu ağabeyler sana korktu.
I think the story is different in like minor cities and counties, at least here in China. And you can choose to live a much more leisurely lifestyle, you know, without having to make a whole lot.
You're listening to The Bridge.
You know, the reason I bought an apartment in Wuhan is because it's what they call new first tier, or it used to be called a second tier city. It's much more affordable. And I like it, and I go there often. For the same reason, you know, a lot of people in China are migrating to these cities. But actually, the more I realized why I moved there, the more I realized I actually should have moved to a third tier city. Like, why not, you know, one of these little towns like Wuhu, it's W-U-H-U, and Anhui, you know, it's really a third tier city. Everything, okay, let's just give some people at home an idea. An apartment in Beijing can cost 5 or 10 million RMB. That's more than $1 million.
Yeah.
Shanghai, it's even more than that.
Yeah.
But if you know, if you go to a third tier city, you can buy a really nice place, 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment overlooking the city in a you know, third tier city for like 500,000 RMB, which is like $80,000. So like you could move to one of these big cities to one of these small cities and just live like a king and just be like, I have one of the nicest views in this little city. and you still have a mall there, and you still have amenities. You just don't have every single fancy international thing, But it's actually a really good life, and a lot of people are much happier there. They work less. People walk slower. They literally walk slower. The smaller town you go in China, the slower people walk.
I totally get it. So the point is, even if you're if you make it in the big city and you have a decent job, making a very nice salary, even in compared to the ones in the U.S., you still feel like it's just becomes so absolute. You feel like I've totally made it. I'm free when it comes to finances. That will take a lot in a big city like Shanghai or Beijing. But in a third-tier city or in a county or in the countryside, you can live off nothing. You can pay a few hundred for rent somewhere, or maybe 1,000 or 2,000. Earlier in the summer, we visited this place. It's a city called Changzhou, and it's 1 hour away from Shanghai by high-speed rail, so it's very convenient to get there. And I thought it was a little place, a countryside off Shanghai. And when I landed, oh my gosh, the railway station itself was so nice and fancy. It was huge. And it was so convenient, the taxis were waiting, or people, they have their own cars. And the environment was beautiful. When we were driving through it, I thought I was on the African savannah or something. It was really flat. And most of my view was the sky, the clear blue sky with rolling clouds. It was so beautiful. So I talked to the locals, and it's actually a pretty wealthy place, southern parts of China, close to Shanghai. And actually people make really decent salaries, and the public facilities are, people are well provided. There are nice parks. Even their free bathrooms are nice. I took photos of free bathrooms, along the roadside because they're so nicely designed. So there's so many choices here in China. So for young people who are tired of making it here in the big city, you can chase your dream somewhere else in China. There's so many different options.
It's fascinating, and I think that may be why in the future China might become more like America, where people are not as career-oriented. Actually, I was looking at the Statista data, and it says, how important is your career progression? And it says for China, 35, South Africa, 28, India, 27, and Brazil, 26. So, about a third of people are it's really important. Career is a huge part of my life. And then from the United States, Great Britain, Germany, Italy, France, all have 14, 10, 9, 8. It's 10% of their life.
That's still hard to believe, though. I think the number's got to be higher than that.
But here's the interesting thing, I think. If you come from a developing country that has recently started to develop, or, China is becoming a developed country, you really think career matters a lot. And if you come from a country where for generations it's already been developed, career, it doesn't matter that much. I think that this is a really interesting way of dividing post-modernity, this is the term, and modernity. Modernity is China has just become a very modern country. Post-modernity is when a generation is raised in a modern place, and the culture becomes very different.
Right.
I think a lot of Americans, there are Americans that are ambitious who want to become lawyers. Actually, most of those people are immigrants, strangely. but most American born and bred, they're they don't actually care that much about money, most of them. As a small minority cares a lot about making a lot of money, and most people just want to live a life. And things like you mentioned at the beginning, my daughter, that was what you said, that's what matters most to you in your life. I think for a lot of Americans, being happy, or being a musician, or being an artist, or spending time with their family, or spending time doing their hobby, whatever it is, being a Star Trek nerd or whatever, those things tend to matter more than how they make their money. And for a lot of Americans and people from highly developed countries that have been developed for generations, what matters to them is just living a life that makes them happy, and going to work is just more like punching a card to get the money to do what they want to do.
That's a luxury, actually.
Yeah, it is.
No, for us, my family, I think my husband and I, we've never really doubted that our daughter will have problem finding a job. Like that's not even the path we've envisioned for her. Like I think it will be highly possible that she might not need to go work at a place. She might not actually have to go work for somebody else. In our vision, because she's really talented, she's an artist kind of child, and she's really smart. So in our vision, she will have her own work in the future, and she will have her own studio. There's no survival mode for her, even in our minds. Yeah, that's just not like we're beyond that. I think our generation, my husband and I, we like when we were little, parents told us about the harder times, but we're not really on survival mode anymore. We all like those. My husband and I, we've been working toward what we want to do. We're always thinking about what we can do that kind of utilizes our talents, bring out our potentials. Not so much about how much money we can make so that we can, live in a better place or eat. Like we've already have that. We don't need huge places, right? And we can eat. There's so many choices, food choices here in China. It's just not a thing anymore. And so for our daughter, it's more about the way we try to offer her the education so that she can bring out her potential. Not so much about, what kind of you're going to be able to have, what you're going to be able to eat or dress. That's not as important. Like, much less not important. Yeah.
You're listening to The Bridge.
和对自然的敬畏，延续着一个古老而稀有的种群。
People who are in their 20s now in China are much more like the postmodern sort of mentality that they have in developed countries. Because you've mentioned multiple times for years on this show that whereas, older people tend to carry water bottles, and things like that to make their own tea, the young people are opulently spending on things like bubble tea and so forth, because they're not as concerned about what it's like to suffer or starve. They know that their next meal will be there and that they can afford things, and saving isn't as important as it was in the past in the younger generations. But I'm also interested in the way some cultural differences that exist in China and the United States. It seems to be my impression. Well, first let me just say, in America, people have jobs a lot, and I worked at a fast food restaurant. I worked at a construction company. Then I worked for a different restaurant, and then I was a cook. And then I worked at a movie theater, and then I worked as a cash accountant, and then I eventually became... My impression is in China...下午好，可亮。
你好，黎明，听众朋友大家好。中国天气权威发布，来关注天气。今天6月10到9号，也就是本周日，一股比较强的冷空气将会从西往东影响咱们国家大部。对于北方来说，今天夜间到7号周五，冷空气主要影响新疆、内蒙古西部以及青藏高原等地。8号、9号周六周日会东移南下，影响长江以北大部。这冷空气呢会带来4到6度的偏北风和6到10度的降温。新疆西北部等地的局地区降温会超过，风力会在8到9级，阵风10到11级。北方大部的气温都会从偏高转为和去年同期持平，会秋以后的气温偏低。7号